Hello, and welcome to the DSO Hygienist Podcast. I'm your host, Christine Deal. I'm a practicing clinical hygienist and dental hygiene instructor with over 30 years of experience. I am an advocate for dental hygienists working in the DSO space. This podcast is an invaluable resource for dental hygienists aiming to excel in their roles and for other dental professionals seeking a deeper understanding of the opportunities and intricacies within the DSO environment. Whether you want to refine your skills, stay up to date on industry innovations, or find inspiration in your career journey, the DSO hygienist offers practical advice and meaningful perspective. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Twice as Nice Uniforms. Dressing for success, infection control, and comfort is crucial for the DSO team. Not only do they need to look great and feel great, but they need to be dressed for safety. Your patients will notice when your team is dressed appropriately, and your staff will perform better. Who better to help your team with these decisions than Twice as Nice Uniforms? Owned by a seasoned dental hygienist, branding expert, fit specialist, and fashion model, Twice as Nice Uniforms are designed to follow infection control and OSHA regulations, alleviate the thermostat wars in your office with temperature-regulating technology, and provide long-lasting, professional-looking scrubs, lab coats, and accessories. Custom uniform programs will take the burden of painstaking ordering, exchanges, and returns off your shoulders. It's proudly made in the USA. And Twice as Nice is giving our listeners a discount code TDH2024 to take advantage of this special offer. Dina Lynch Eisenberg is a leading expert in conflict management and communication, serving as the CEO of Happy Practice Consulting. With over 29 years of experience, she helps dental support organizations, DSOs, and single practice dentists build trust, improve retention, and foster growth through effective conflict resolution. Her work enables teams to navigate difficult conversations that resolve issues while preserving relationships. Dina has designed transformative conflict management programs for global organizations, including Coca-Cola, Genentech, and Twitter, where she developed the first Ombuds program for a social media platform. Her innovative approach has earned her recognition as Boston's Business Journal 40 Under 40 leader and a Lifetime Achievement Award in conflict management. As an entrepreneur and author of Fiverr, the Essential Buying Guide, Dina's expertise has been featured in Inc. and Entrepreneur magazines. She holds an Executive MBA from the Tuck School of Business and a Juris Doctorate degree, and has been a guest lecturer at Harvard University, Harvard Law School, and taught graduate courses at UMass. Through engaging workshops and consulting, Dina equips leaders with practical tools to create inclusive, bully-free workplaces. By partnering with Dina, dental leaders can transform their practices into thriving, collaborative environments designed for long-term success. I'd like to welcome Dina to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Christine, I'm so delighted to be here. I'm excited for the great conversations we're about to have.
Yeah, I am really, really excited to learn more. So we'll just jump right in. What is Ombuds, and how is that different than a mediator?
Oh, my favorite question. So here's the thing. Ombuds is the best kept management tool secret in America. Do you know that there's been ombuds, and that's the correct term because we're gender neutral, ombuds in the United States since 1960. And yet, so many people have no idea what it is. So I love to explain it. So an ombuds is a conflict management expert who specializes in organizational conflict or organizational issues. So you can have a variety of types of organizational ombuds. In fact, the government has one. The FBI has an ombuds. The World Bank has an ombuds. Most major corporations have ombuds. And the role of the ombuds is twofold. We do two jobs within the organization. One of our jobs is really to be there for the teammates, the employees within the organization, for when they have any conflicts or issues that, sometimes you just don't know how to resolve on your own, and you want to talk to somebody about it, but you want to do it privately. So we meet, and the person describes what's going on, and we have a talk about it and figure out what they'd like to see happen and whether or not that can happen within the organization that they're in, what the rules are, what the policies are. And then we help them have good conversations by maybe practicing. So they leave that time with the ombuds called a visit. People who visit the ombuds are visitors, and we have a visit, it's kind of like a chat. They leave that time really feeling like a lot more relaxed, a lot more confident about what they'd like to see happen, and with some support around how to message things so the information they want to get across the other person lands without, ruining that relationship. So that's one level. We help employees have better conversations and resolve conflict at really the lowest level that you can, which is just talking to another person. The other part that's so intriguing is that we also work with senior leadership. So the Ombuds is there to help the senior leaders understand what's going on in the organization on a day-to-day basis. When you're at that level, I kind of call it the Game of Thrones analogy. So when you're at that level, you're at the top of the tower, right? You're the king and the queen of the organization, and you have your advisors around you, but you're comfortable. You're eating, you're fine, you're resting, you're having mead or whatever you're drinking, and the people around you are comfortable too. And when you look out the window and look down at your organization, you see people moving around and having activity, but you can't really tell what they're doing or how they're feeling about it. So you think it's great. But when you get down on the level that everybody else is at, where all the activity is happening, people are having issues. They're concerned, they're upset, they feel like they're not being heard. And so really the Ombuds is there to be that bridge between the two and to go up the castle and say, guess what, guys, at the top? Here's what's happening on the ground. Here are the things that people are concerned about. And last week when you decide to open all the store grains and give out all the wheat, not everybody loved that. And so we need you to know that next time you might want to announce that first. Or, next time you might want to take a different direction in leading the village, right? And so the Ombuds is really there to be the beacon for senior leadership to say, on a day-to-day basis, we're going to help you be your best self by pointing out areas where there are hidden issues. You have opportunities to change things and grow more. So those are the two things that an Ombuds does. It's a really unusual role. Some people are lawyers. I'm a lawyer. Other people are not. They come from other disciplines like psychology and marketing and those kinds of things. So you might have a mix of who has the role, but we all have conflict management training. We all abide by a code of practice and a standard. And so one of the standards of Ombuds is that we don't talk about what happens. Kind of like Fight Club, right? You don't talk about what happens in Fight Club. Ombuds don't talk about what happens when in an Ombuds visit, right? It's confidential. And that's what makes it so useful to organizations, because it's the one place that an employee or a teammate can go and say exactly what's on their mind and get help with no consequence.
Yeah, and I really think this is so applicable to the DSO structure.
Yeah, I do too.
So that's wonderful. That is a really great service. So speaking of conflict, because in dentistry we have a little.
No.
What is your approach to conflict resolution?
Yeah, I think people just need to understand it better, right? So I'm going to ask you a question, and maybe the answer will be yes, but did your mom ever tell you, if you ever get into a fight at school, go see the teacher?
Yes.
Everybody's mom told them that, right? My mom told me that too. You know what that really means is that our parents trained us to go to somebody else when we're in conflict with people. So we don't really feel comfortable doing it on our own, right? So the first thing I want people to know is, one, conflict is everywhere. It's inevitable. It's all through your daily life. And the reason that you struggle with some conflicts is because some are easy. Like this morning when you got up and you decided what to wear, you had to choose between a whole closet full of clothes, but you were able to pick one, right? That was simple. But maybe other things, other conflicts in your life, and just to be clear, I define a conflict simply as two things that are in opposition, right? So ideas, people, you can be in opposition with your own beliefs, right? That's what a conflict is. If the conflict is one where you don't immediately have an answer or it's not easy for you, that's when we struggle, right? So I want people to know that it's normal to be in conflict. It's not necessarily a bad thing. You're in conflict many times during the day. You just don't recognize it because you have the answer. So that's one thing. Two, I want people to recognize that there's a difference between conflict management and conflict resolution, right? Conflict resolution is when you sit down, hopefully, and talk with the other person about what you're feeling, what you observed, how you'd like to solve the situation, and asking them the same things, how they're feeling, what they've observed, and how they'd like to solve the situation. That's the lowest level of conflict resolution, and then it elevates from that. The highest level is, of course, when you go to court. And I try to prevent people from taking that route if it's possible, because that's where you have the least control. When you're on a one-to-one level, you control what happens and where the conversation goes and what the solutions are. When you give up that control and say, I cannot handle this myself, throwing up my hands, people, and go see a lawyer, and then the lawyer takes you to court, that means the lawyer has more control than you do, because they're going to tell you how the conflict is going to be resolved. And then when they go to court, the judge has the ultimate control, because they're the ultimate authority, right? And you're not going to argue with the judge if you don't like the outcome, right? You just have to accept it. So I want people to know that it's better to resolve things on your own. And the best way to do that is have some conflict management systems in place so that you already know what you're going to do when conflicts come up. You're not like, oh my gosh, we had a conflict, now what?
Yeah, right. So what steps do you recommend to address like a current conflict in your workplace?
Yeah, I think it really depends on who you are in the workplace. So I'll be specific. If you are the we'll talk about DSO. So if you're the chief of operations, it might be your role that you are going to be the one that's going to manage conflict. If you're in a setting where you have an office manager and you're the hygienist, you might be the one solving conflict because the other teammates come to you before they go to the office manager, right? That's very possible. So you want to make sure that you have some conflict management policies in place. This is how we manage conflict on a day-to-day basis. And the level is we talk to each other first. If we can't get that done, we're going to reach out and maybe have a mediation. If you're the person doing the mediation, here's where it gets a little tricky. Mediations are great to do, but the person who facilitates the mediation needs to be neutral, right? Can't be on either person's side. And so if you're in a leadership position, that gets tricky because you will take one person's side over another. And maybe that's when you want to call in external to do the mediation who has no connections to anybody in the practice, doesn't need to be particularly on one person's side or the other, and can bring that new, fresh perspective. If you don't have the ability to do that, I think you have to explain to the parties very clearly what your role is, as in, I'm here to help you have a good conversation, and the way I'm going to do that is by helping you say the thing you want to say and pointing out when there's agreement and commonality between you and the other person, and also making sure that the conversation stays civil and productive, right? You lay those ground rules and you let people know if you're in a place where you have responsibility for someone's salary or their performance, you want to make it clear that this conversation is separate from your other role.
Okay. So are there certain techniques or methods that you use to get to the root of conflict? Because, sometimes conflicts happen and then you bring the people together, but they doesn't really resolve it. We just kind of bury it and move on.
Yeah, that's the part where we use some expertise because we're not going to bury it. Before you go into that mediation, you want to do two things. One, you want to be very clear in your own self how you feel about conflict. It doesn't help to do the mediation if you're somebody who is conflict avoidant, right? Things are not going to go the way you want if you also are trying to avoid the conflict. So you need to know where you are so that you can manage how your emotions are flowing, because you need to control your emotions so you can help other people control theirs. You need to have a set period of time. So we're only going to do this for 2 hours, say. So you're inviting them both to that conversation. And before you get to the 2-hour conversation, you will have had a 30-minute to an hour conversation with each person. The purpose for that conversation really is just to let them vent. And then help them figure out what's the message, one thing that you really want this person to understand and one thing that you really want this person to do next, right? So they're not, because you get upset, your mind goes all over the place, you're saying whatever. So before the mediation, you're trying to get this person to think about what is the most important message I need this person to know or hear from me. And then they get to practice it until they get to the mediation with you. So they're both doing that. So they both come in with 2 messages they want to deliver. And then you're helping them to deliver those messages. Now, here's something important that most folks don't do that I do in my practice. So I'm trying to encourage other people to do it, which is do not leave the mediation unless both parties, that's the other folks in the mediation, agree on what statement they're going to share about what happened. Because the way I know, gossip happens. People are aware that something is going on, and they have opinions, and they're going to be talking about it. If you say nothing, people will fill that in with their own information. You don't want that. You want both of them to leave saying, we talked about it, and we agreed, and this is usually what I ask parties to think about saying, is we agreed that it's over, and we would like everybody to return to normal and just move forward. We're not going to be talking about this or answering any questions, right?
What happens if it resurfaces?
If it comes back, that's the other part of the end of the mediation, which is talk about what happens the next time it happens, right? So I was once in this mediation with 3 women, and they just could not get along for the life of them. They had very similar backgrounds, and that made them mistrust each other, right? And so they couldn't really work together. We went through the mediation. They all delivered their messages. They said, so what's going to happen tomorrow? And they could all talk about how they're going to give each other grace and try to be pausing before they made inflammatory statements. I was like, okay, so that sounds all great, but you're humans. What's going to happen when you don't do that? And they were like, we don't know. I was like, well, now is the time to talk about that. What happens when it happens again? What do you want to see? Is there some signal you can give each other to remind you that, hey, we agreed we're going to be giving each other grace? Or what are the mechanisms do you want to use to get back to the place where you are having a good relationship? So you want to make sure that you're planning ahead in that mediation for the next time it happens. So they're already prepared. They're like, oh, you know what? And with these 3 women, I gave them a word, in a really unusual, stupid word, so that if somebody said in the conversation, it would catch their attention very quickly, and they'd be like, oh yeah, we remember now. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, a trigger word.
Yes. Yes.
So, obviously this is all about communication and how we communicate with each other. Can you suggest some ways to foster better communication and collaboration within our teams?
Yeah, and I take a really unusual approach to this, so you probably won't hear this anyplace else. But before communicating, I really like to think about what's the purpose of this communication, right? Because we don't usually think about that before we talk. We just kind of talk. Mm-hmm. So what am I trying to get across? Am I trying to share information? Am I trying to share feelings? Am I trying to get information or understand feelings? What's the purpose of this, right? Am I trying to give feedback? So you really want to know, why am I having this conversation? And then you want to think about, and this is the unusual part, how do I want this person to feel after we talk? If people go into these conversations feeling like, I got to have the right words. I got to say the right thing, or else, I don't know, people won't like me or something bad will happen, which is what keeps us from communicating with each other. But if you think about, how do I want this person to feel, doesn't it just shift things for you?
Yeah.
It shifts it a lot. So I'm thinking, okay, I want to give Christine this information or feedback about how we've been working together in the operatory. And I want her to leave the conversation feeling like I got her back and that we are good. We have a good relationship. That makes it so much easier to figure out the words that are going to match those feelings, right?
Yeah. Well, I love this, and I'm sure people want to learn more about what you're doing. So, if our listeners want to learn more, and how do they get a hold of you?
Well, I would love to talk to any of your listeners, and they certainly can reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's a great place. It's Dina Lynch Eisenberg. Or you can drop by my site, which is Happy Practice Consulting. Because this is such a new idea for DSO spaces, I'm offering a free consult, an Elevate My Team consult, so you can come and talk to me about what's going on with your team, and I'll give you some tips and suggestions on how to move forward.
I love it. I think it is so needed in our industry. So I'm so glad I got to talk to you today. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share this information. Like you, I think it's going to be practice changing. So thank you, Christine.
Thank you for listening to the DSO Hygienist podcast. Please follow or subscribe to be alerted of new episodes.